By the time I was 5 years of age, my father had taught me the names of dozens of flowers and herbs and shrubs and trees. He was a judge, and his work took him all over the county. And every evening when he got home, after he'd had a few quick drinks, he'd pick me up in his arms and carry me out to the walled garden. "Tell me now," he'd ask, "where precisely are we?" "We're in your garden." "Oh, you're such a clever little missy."
Hi, my name is Beth Burns, and I'm the director of the Guthrie Theatre's touring program. I'm coming to you today from the Guthrie Theatre in Minneapolis, but not all of the Guthrie's productions take place here. Some of our productions travel along the road, touring across the Midwest as part of our Guthrie on Tour program, the program that I work on. In 2001, we are bringing our production of Molly Sweeney, a play written by Brian Friel and directed by Joe Dowling, the Guthrie Theatre's artistic director, to more than 30 communities across the Midwest. We're traveling from places as large as St. Louis, Missouri, to as small as Staples Motley, Minnesota, bringing performances and education workshops to students and adults all across the region. Our touring program was resumed in 2000 with a production of A Midsummer Night's Dream, which also traveled to communities across the Midwest. Prior to that, the Guthrie had toured extensively throughout the 1970s and 1980s. Molly Sweeney, this spring's production, will travel to 30 communities with the story of Molly Sweeney, a woman who is blind since childhood but undergoes sight restoration surgery as an adult. You will have an opportunity today to hear from the actors who perform in Molly Sweeney, as well as see some footage from the production. Thank you for your interest in the Guthrie and for joining us today.
I'm talking to Laura Esping, who plays the lead role of Molly Sweeney, and Brian Friel's subtle and nuanced treatment of sight and seeing and insight and perception and understanding. Great to be talking to you tonight, Laura. I wonder if you could talk at first about the challenge of preparing for or trying to play a character who is sight challenged.
Well, first of all, I would say trying to be as authentic as possible. Not being visually impaired myself, I wanted to be as accurate as I could, and so I have had the ability to get in touch with a woman here in town who is blind, and it was wonderful. I spent a day with her, and she lives on her own in her own house, and delightful woman, and it was wonderful to just spend that time with her and watch her, actually. And I've been reading some books, and a lot of it is imagination. All of that sort of rolled into one, I would say. I also did go to, there is a center in Minneapolis, the Vision Loss Resource Center, and they lent me a pair of goggles that simulated pretty closely what Molly's sight would be. She is able to detect light and dark and a shadow in front of her face, and so to look through those and to spend some time with those was very helpful as well. But to also make sure that I'm not, I think that as sighted people, we naturally look to the eyes when we're making connections, and I don't do that, or can't do that for the entire show, except at the end. And so to make sure that I'm not doing that is important.
Okay, good. Can you talk about the character of Molly Sweeney, her strengths, and I don't know if it's too strong a word, her innocence?
I remember when I first auditioned for the role, I said to Joe that what struck me when I first read the play is that, first of all, Molly was a woman. A woman. She saw with her hands, not the way that we see. That I felt that she was a sensual being, married, worked a job, you know, just a common folk kind of person. And I don't know, I mean, I think a lot of people just come into this world with a certain amount of strength. She lived in a family situation that was pretty challenging, and sometimes when you grow up in situations that are challenging, you have a choice, and that is to, I suppose, crumple under the weight of that, or find somewhere in you an inner strength to deal with that. And I think that she was able to do that. She had a great start in the world of the garden, you know, the earth and plants, and her father luckily introducing her to that world. And I think that she found a lot of solace in nature, and so maybe derived some strength from that. And her imagination, I think she has an incredible gift of imagination as well that helped her through.
I knew only my own world. Disadvantaged in some ways, of course it was. But at that stage, I never thought of it as deprived. And Mr. Rice knew that. And how could I have told those other doctors how much pleasure my world offered me? From my work, from the radio, from walking, from music, from cycling, but especially from swimming. Oh, I can't tell you the joy I got from swimming. I used to think, and I know this sounds silly, but I really did believe that I got more pleasure, more delight from swimming than sighted people can ever get. Just offering yourself to the experience. Every pore open and eager for that world of pure sensation. Of sensation alone. Sensation that could not have been enhanced by sight. Experience that existed only in touch and feel, and moving swiftly and rhythmically through that unfolding world. And a sense of such assurance, such liberation, such concordance with it. Oh, I can't tell you the joy swimming gave me.
Today I'm talking to Nat Fuller, who plays the role of the eye doctor, Mr. Rice in Molly Sweeney. The story concerns Molly Sweeney and the attempt to restore sight, and the enthusiasm of her husband, Frank, for this project, and the opportunity realized by Mr. Rice for transforming his own derelict career through performing an operation on Molly Sweeney.
What an unlikely couple. I had met him once before, about a week earlier, by himself. He had called to ask, would I see her? Just to give an opinion, if only to confirm that nothing could be done for her. I suggested that he'd phone the hospital and make an appointment in the usual way. But of course he didn't. And within 2 hours, he was back at my door again with an enormous folder of material that had to do with her case, and that he had compiled over the years. And he'd be happy to go through it with me right there and then, because not only were the documents and reports and photographs interesting in themselves, but they would be essential reading for someone like myself who was going to take her case on. Yes. An ebullient fellow, full of energy and inquiry and the indiscriminate enthusiasms of the self-taught.
Well, Mr. Rice is reputed to be a brilliant ophthalmologist, and that's indeed how he has thought of himself. But because of his inability to handle his success, he's now fallen into, well, you called it dereliction. He's alcoholic, not to the point that he can't function at all, but he spends a lot of his evenings with whiskey. He's given up on life. His wife has run off with one of his colleagues. He is estranged from his children. So he's a person who's given up on life. And at this particular point in the play, he sees his interaction with Molly Sweeney as maybe an opportunity to get back in the game. Possibly he sees it as a phantom desire to get back into the game, and that's one of the most exciting reasons he has for dealing with her.
An article he had cut out of a magazine about miraculous ophthalmological techniques once practiced in Tibet. Or was it Mongolia? Diplomas she had won in provincial swimming championships. And remarkably, in his own furious handwriting, remarkably, extracts from essays by various philosophers on the relationship between vision and knowledge. between seeing and understanding. A strange fellow indeed.
Now Rice is unique because his whole character, the character he shows the outside world, is a performance. He's anglicized his speech, so you think he's English. He wants to be English. He's really born in a fairly low economic status in the county of Kilmeedy. So he has made a big act of his whole life that he has concocted. So he is, in a sense, a work of art, and he's fallen from that high pinnacle. So when he performs, when he talks about how he performed on that particular operation with Molly Sweeney, when he felt, I think, what we would call a peak experience, those moments when you're in the zone and everything just seems to come together, and it's marvelous, it's intoxicating. And that happens to him. He feels like he is regaining not only that glory, but maybe he thinks, because now he's suddenly doing it for Molly, he thinks that he has suddenly reached something truer. And it's, you have to know the whole context of the play, but he experiences it as a kind of miracle. And I think a lot of us, both sometimes in performances on stage or in performances in life, when we really rise to an occasion and it seems to take care of itself, suddenly something is given to you that takes you beyond what you thought you were. You perform, and it is art. It's beyond just nailing the job.
And the second, and much less worthy thought I had was this. Not a thought, a phantom desire, a fantasy in my head. Absurd, bizarre, because I knew only the barest outlines of a case. I hadn't even examined her yet. The thought, the bizarre thought that perhaps up here in Donegal, not in Paris or Dallas or Vienna or Milan, but perhaps right up here in remote Ballybeg, was I about to be given, what is the vulgar parlance, the chance of a lifetime? The 1 in 1,000 opportunity that can rescue a career? No, transform a career. Dare I say it, restore a reputation.
Can you talk a little bit about Brian Friel and his connection with the Guthrie Theatre? I understand that it was like when the Guthrie was about to open in 1963, the first season was being rehearsed with Sir Tyrone Guthrie. Brian Friel, this relatively unknown young writer, was invited to come and serve as sort of a working apprenticeship for a few months, watching Tyrone Guthrie rehearse some plays, Hamlet, I believe. You talk about how it is important for the Guthrie to sort of reconnect right back to its origin, when it was just beginning, with this author, Brian Friel.
Well, I'm not the world's expert on Brian Friel, but the way that I understand the story is that Tyrone Guthrie, Tony Guthrie, had read some of Friel's short stories in the New Yorker and really liked his touch with language and dialogue and thought he would make a great playwright. And so he thought, I'll invite him over. And Friel, I think, was a teacher and took a leave of absence to come to the Guthrie for 6 months, and it changed his life. And it gave him a new outlook on the drama form as a way for him to express himself. And of course, he's written some of the greatest, certainly some of the greatest modern plays in Irish literature. And I think that the Guthrie today, as it was back then, is still trying to find artists in different levels and give them a chance to work at top level and hopefully develop talent. And I know that Joe Dowling is working to develop, through the University of Minnesota, younger actors companies, through the Guthrie Experience, work with actors, working with writers like Syl Jones in developing plays like Black No More to try to develop new writing. Hopefully, when the Guthrie repertoire expands with the new building in 2004, we hope, that aspect of creativity at the Guthrie will be expanded.
You talk about the difficulty as an actor. We talk about acting. The difficulty of this sort of storytelling soliloquy style in this play. I mean, is it much more difficult than when you can actually interact with the actors on stage? Is it much more of a complex, challenging sort of a performance to try and give?
I think it's very difficult. Now, we're very early in the process, and we have been rehearsing without our fourth character. The fourth character is the audience.
Right, yes.
And so it's like we are starting rehearsals with a character that we haven't learned all the reactions with. So they're going to teach us as we go along. But it's very hard to, because you don't have that interaction that we depend on so much. A lot of my reactions are conditioned off what another actor gives me. And we can play back and forth and develop an energy together. We don't get to do that here. A lot of the reactions are in our imaginations. We have to see what's happening in the story, make that very vivid to us, and react to it. And now, as we develop our relationship with the audience, to develop reactions with the audience. It's one of the things I've been really excited about in this play, because I haven't done anything like this. It's like presentations and monologue, but we alternate. Then we be quiet and we listen, and we have to come off what the other actor says. There's a connection, but then we go directly to the audience. And it's exciting, and I'm anxious to see how it develops as we go along in the run.
I'm speaking with Michael Booth, who plays the role of the ebullient Frank Sweeney in Brian Friel's Molly Sweeney, the role of the eccentric and quixotic husband of the partially sighted Molly. Can you talk about the wonderful storytelling that's built into it? I know there's music built into the language, but this is basically an event in storytelling. Can you talk about that? You know, the challenge for that as an actor, but also, you know, the opportunity that the script offers you to tell stories directly to the audience.
That's an interesting quality to playing this part. He tells many stories, short stories, longer, involved stories, and most of them with great enthusiasm.
Yes.
So, above all else, my challenge has been to find the most important pieces of the story that get the entire story across, the point across. Because none of these stories are in the script just to fill time or to be strictly entertaining. There's a purpose to it. So it's important for me to keep in touch with that. Keep in touch with which pieces of this story are going to get across to the audience the basic idea of the story, that the point of it, really, that Friel has set out. And it's great fun telling stories.
Yes.
I don't fancy myself much of a storyteller.
Right.
So, because I tend to come to the end of a story a lot of times and go, now, what was the point of that? What was I really trying to get across? But Friel is a tremendous storyteller. His short stories, of course, are brilliant, and he's, you know, adapted that short storytelling skill into telling stories in the theater very well, especially in this play.
One of the more interesting discoveries I made, this was long before I met Molly. For 3.5 years, I had a small goat farm on the island of Inishbjorg off the Mayo coast. No, not a farm for small goats, a farm for ordinary goats. Well, extraordinary goats, as a matter of fact, because I imported 2 piebald Iranian goats, and I can't tell you how complicated and expensive that whole process was. But the reason I wanted them, the reason I wanted Iranians, was that in all the research I had done, and according to all the experts, they were reputed to give the highest milk yield. Untrue, as it turned out. And because their pelts were in great demand as wall coverings in California. Equally untrue, I'm afraid. And although they bred very successfully, eventually I had a herd of 14. They couldn't endure the Mayo winters, with the result that I had to keep them indoors and feed them for 6 months of the year. In Mayo, the winter lasts for 6 months, for God's sake. Well, at least it did on Inishbjorg. And of course, that threw my whole financial planning into disarray, as you can imagine. And yes, as a matter of interest, they are small animals, Iranian goats. And as I say, from Iran, which, as you know, is an ancient civilization in Southwest Asia. But I was telling you about what?
Can you talk about the relationship that Frank has with Molly? It's one of the lines that suggested that, just tell me what you think of this suggestion, that perhaps Molly's blindness and the recovery from blindness is just another project for the constantly effervescent and changing character of Frank. Do you agree with that, or how do you react to that idea?
I'm a little defensive about that idea.
Right, okay.
Because I have to adopt Frank Sweeney's point of view.
Right.
But I think on a certain level, there's truth to that. And that's part of the, that's part of Frank's set of flaws, is that he sees a project and he goes without looking back. He goes, you know, headlong into the thing. And that's part of his character. I think the lesson that Frank learns throughout the course of the play and the journey that he goes on, in some ways, wakes him up to that. Not that he becomes a totally changed man in the end, but this is a project that is of a different nature than any project he's taken on before, and so the result is very powerful on him. It's very difficult for him to take. But I think on one level, yes, it is he sees it as a project. You know, right immediately after meeting Molly, he goes to the library and researches vision.
Yes.
I think he looks at just about everything as a project. So.
She would still have to learn to see. And that would be an enormous and very difficult undertaking. The way he explained it was this. She knew dozens of flowers, not to see, not by sight. She knew them only if she could touch them and smell them, because those tactile engrams were implanted in her brain since she was a child. But if she weren't allowed to touch, to smell, she wouldn't know one flower from another. She wouldn't know a flower from a football. How could she? And interestingly, this very same problem was debated 300 years ago by two philosophers, William Molyneux and his friend John Locke. I came across this discussion in a do-it-yourself magazine of all places. Fascinating stuff, philosophy. Absolutely fascinating.
That's not to say that I don't think, it's not to say that they don't have a profound love for one another. I think they definitely do. And that's one of the, you know, that's one of the more touching elements to their story, to Frank's and Molly's story, apart from Molly's story on her own, is that it's not just his interest in a project, it's also his interest in a person. And I think it's very sincere.
And I had to be in the hospital for 10, fasting. Frank wanted to get a taxi, but I said we should walk to get all that alcohol out of the system. And it wasn't that we had organized anything that night. A few neighbors just dropped in to wish me luck, and then a few more, and then Frank said, "Come on, this is beginning to feel like a wake." And away he went to the off-license and came back with a load of stuff. Who was there? Tony and Betty from this side, with Molly, their baby. They called her after me. She was just a toddler then. And the Quinns from that side, Jack and Mary. Jack wasn't drinking for some reason, and Mary certainly was. So that was a delicate situation.
The account of the mad, whirling sort of dance that she has. Can you talk about how that reflects her spirit, or a quality in her character?
Oh yeah, well I think that she has some of her mother in her.
Right.
And we see some of that there. But she realizes that, I think, that she has a definite sense of home in her life and her work and everything that she enjoys in her world. And the sense of that someone's going to take that away from them, which is also very strong in the Irish culture, that sense of exile, of being sent away. And it's sort of, I think, a defense for her. And to show them that she's fine, absolutely fine in her world, and triumphs in it, in all her physical, sensorial glory. Now watch me, you know? I'm going to show you. And she does, with great fervor, I think.
Brilliant stuff. Thank you. That was a great.
I don't know what I expected when the bandages would be removed. I think maybe I didn't allow myself any expectations. I know in his heart, Frank believed that somehow, miraculously, I would be given the perfect vision that sighted people have. Even though Mr. Rice told us again and again that my eyes weren't capable of that vision. And I know what Mr. Rice hoped for, that I would have partial sight. That would be a total success for me, is what he said. But I'm sure he meant it would be great for all of us. As for myself, if I had any hope, I suppose it was that neither Frank nor Mr. Rice would be too disappointed, because it had all become so important for them. No, that wasn't accurate either. Yes, I did want to see. For God's sakes, of course I wanted to see. But that wasn't an expectation, not even a mad hope. If there was a phantom desire, a fantasy in my head, it was this. That perhaps by some means I might be afforded a brief excursion to this land of vision. Not to live there, just to visit. And during my stay, to devour it. Again and again and again, with greedy, ravenous eyes. To gorge on all those luminous sights and wonderful spectacles, until I knew every detail, intimately and utterly. Every ocean, every leaf, every field, every star, every tiny flower, and then, oh yes, then, to return home again, to my own world, with all that rare understanding within me forever.
Now that you've heard from some of our actors and seen footage from the production, I hope that you're as excited as we are about one of the theater's most important programs, the Guthrie on Tour. And if you have an opportunity, please join us on the road. We'd love to be in your hometown with Guthrie on Tour. The Guthrie on Tour represents all that is good about the Guthrie. The Midwest is the region that made this theater strong, and we will continue to serve the region with our programs on the road and here at home in Minneapolis. Thanks so much for your interest.